What's happening? Welcome to the Jon Kiper Show. I'm Jon Kiper. So, my girlfriend Emily, my partner, is on a trip to North Carolina to deal with a house that her father inherited, and so my co-host today is going to be this plant. Plant's probably not going to have a lot to say, but I didn't want to sit here alone like a weirdo with no friends. It's hard to find people to come on the show who are willing to talk honestly about their political views. And it's also hard to find people that, can string together a coherent sentence in a way that you, the listener, will be able to hear. But today we're going to talk about my new community first economics agenda. So I'm 42. My entire life has been built, the economic system that our country has been using since I was born is this idea of trickle-down economics, okay? Where if we cut regulation for businesses, if we cut taxes for businesses, if we cut taxes for wealthy people, the money will just trickle down to all the poor and middle-class people. This is Reaganomics. It's something Ronald Reagan championed. And that, frankly, a lot of the Democrats and Republicans after him also championed this. Bill Clinton once said, the era of big government is over. And this is when the Democrats were basically surrendering to the corporate interests. And this is what we're fighting back against now, is the results of this trickle-down economic theory, which, let's be honest, and I want to say this for everyone in the back, trickle-down economics is bullshit. It's bullshit. It's always been bullshit. It was never going to work. It was just a simple way for the Republicans to sell tax cuts for the rich and for them to sell lack or a reduction in corporate oversight and corporate regulation. And let's look around. What's happened? What's happened in the last 40 years? The rich have gotten richer. The poor have gotten poorer. And the middle class is basically hollowed out, is a shell of itself. And, this wasn't always the case, all right? And one of the big reasons why this happened, in my opinion, is that over a number of court cases, beginning even in the 70s, the Supreme Court began to allow more money to be donated to political campaigns. Money particularly from corporations. Eventually, it was through political action committees, but they kept freeing up the amount that people could donate. And when money becomes free speech, someone with more money has more free speech than you do, or I do. And it used to be that the Democrats took a lot of money of donations from the unions, and then they worked with the unions. But after these court cases and leading up to Citizens United and after Citizens United, the Democrats said, hey, the Republicans are getting all this corporate money. We've got to take corporate money too, or else we're not going to be able to compete with them. And what happened is they took the corporate money, and it was way more money than the unions could provide. So the unions were left out of the discussion. And since then, union membership in this country has just been falling and falling and falling until now it's at its lowest levels in decades. I think it's about 11% of the country is in unions right now. At its peak, I think it was like 30% of the country was in a union during the 50s, the roaring 50s, when the government or the economy was doing really well. It was because a lot of people were in unions, and those unions were fighting for a lot of the rights that you and I take for granted. Rights like an 8-hour workday, a 40-hour work week, a 5-day work week in which we don't have to work weekends. Like, these are all because unions fought for them for decades and decades and decades. So now that we know that trickle-down economics doesn't work and that big corporations have too much power, what's our new paradigm? What's our new idea that we're going to use to change this? And that's where I came up with recently this idea of community first economics. And what is community first economics? It's where we focus on our local community first. So we worry about a single mom who can't pay her rent or is struggling to pay her rent and is working multiple jobs. And I'm thinking of specific people when I say that in my town. We worry about elderly folks who are getting priced out of their trailer park or their mobile home because the taxes keep going up. We worry about children who are going to school and don't have money for lunch, right? Kids at school should be fed, period. And when we focus on our local community, making sure everyone's housed and has access to good food and good education, then the corporations will benefit because people will, one, if they're paying less money for rent and mortgage, they'll have more money to spend at the corporations, to go to Target and buy things, to go to my burger shop and buy things, and to have more money in the economy. It's not very helpful. If someone's working 60 hours a week and is still paying more than half their money towards rent or mortgage, you have all this money going to the banks that own the mortgages and the landlords, and it's not sloshing around in the economy. A healthy economy, people are spending about 30% of their money on housing, 30% of rent or mortgage. In an unhealthy economy like we have now, it's 50, 60, 70%. I know people that are basically spending their entire paycheck almost on rent and mortgage and utilities and all this stuff. So we've got to address these issues. And that's where my campaign, again, community first economics is our plan. And how are we going to address that? Well, we're going to begin with three things. And those are lowering property taxes. And it's important that you understand, even if you're a renter, high property taxes raise your rent. Okay, your landlord takes a portion of your rent and pays the property taxes. So every time the property taxes go up, your landlord uses that as a reason to raise your rent. So we got to lower property taxes. Now, how are we going to do that? We do that by changing the way that we fund education. And right now, the legislature is actually working on this. A judge recently told the state of New Hampshire that the state needs to double the amount, almost double the amount that it sends to the towns for public education. I've said in this other videos, but in case you missed it, your town is paying 60 to 70% of the whole budget for your school. That's not how it's supposed to be according to the New Hampshire Constitution, as was laid out in several court cases, Claremont 1, 2, and 3. It's the state's obligation to pay for public education. And if you're curious, it's Part 2, Article 83 of the New Hampshire Constitution, where it lays out that the state is supposed to cherish education. Now, what does cherish mean? I would say make sure all the kids are well educated, okay? And I will say this, okay? Sometimes money is not the answer. Sometimes teaching methods need to be evolved and adapted. But the third thing we're going to do, so like I said, we're going to address property taxes by changing the formula for how we fund education to make it more equitable and fair and not regressive, because under the current system, the richest towns pay the least, the poorest towns pay the most. So the third thing we're going to do is build affordable housing and address the affordable housing crisis. So again, the three things that we're going to start with focusing on a community-first economics agenda is education funding, property taxes, affordable housing. Like I said, your rent is higher because of the property taxes. Also, your mortgage is higher. When I first started looking for a house many years ago, because as you may or may not know, I live in a 740 square foot apartment above here. When I first started looking for a house, I talked to my buddy who was a mortgage agent, and he said, John, you could buy, you're qualified for, I think it was $300,000 in New Hampshire. But if you move to Maine, I could qualify you for $350,000 for a mortgage because the property taxes are lower. And when you're getting a mortgage, they look at the monthly amount based on your monthly income. And I used to own a house. In 2005, I bought a house in Elliott, Maine, and my taxes were $2,500 for the year. It was a 2,200 square foot house on about 2 acres. In Newmarket right now, and I'm sure that the taxes have gone up. That was decades ago. But point being, that was one house, $2,500. Now I live in a 1,400 square foot house, so a third smaller than that house, and my taxes are about $6,000, $7,000 a year. So way higher. And of course, taxes have gone up everywhere, so I'm sure the taxes on that house are higher. But point being, Maine has lower property taxes. I met someone in Claremont who had moved across the border to Vermont, and they said that they were saving $500 a month because the property taxes are that much lower in Vermont. Now, of course, in Vermont and Maine, you have an income tax, and that's part of the formula that you got to figure out. Does it make more sense for you to live in Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire? But for a lot of people, leaving the state saves them money. So that's bad because the people who are leaving are people like me, middle class, working people who this state really needs. So this is why it's so important that we have a new system and we move beyond this idea of trickle-down economics. It was never going to work. And it was a bill of goods, and it's time for the Republicans to be forced to explain themselves, okay? And the Democrats, we need to make this argument that trickle-down economics didn't work, and we need a new system by which to run our whole state and our whole country. And like I said, this is community first economics. Now, those three things that I talked about, housing, property taxes, education funding, those are just three things. There's obviously many, many other things that we need to be concerned about in our state. But here's the problem. I'm in a political campaign for governor. If I talk about all of the problems in our state, and there's probably dozens that I can just think of, if I was to talk about all of the issues, no one would remember anything, and no one would know what my campaign was about. So you have to have three things. And if you're going to run for something, if you're going to run for governor or senate or Congress or whatever, have three things that you're going to talk about. You can use my three if you want to push community first economics. But the point is that people have a limited capacity to hear and remember things. So when I go and talk to people, I just reiterate these three things: housing, education, property taxes. Housing, education, property taxes, community first economics. I say it over and over and over so that people walk away. And if someone says, what's Kiper about? They go, oh, what was Kiper about? All right, community first economics, housing, education, property taxes. Okay, and this is also why these are good issues. Because I know from running this restaurant for a decade, okay, I talked to lots of Republicans. I also talked to Democrats. I talked to independents. I didn't ask people's political affiliation before they walked into the restaurant. But when I started running for governor, I found out people would say, hey, I'm actually a Republican. I can't vote for you in the primary. And I was shocked to find out that some of my regulars, young people, some people that I just assumed were Democrats were in fact Republican. I had no problem with that. Because I need their money. As a business owner, that's how it works. You need to take their money. But so one thing I learned from talking to these people is they had the same concerns as the average Democrat. Okay. They were concerned about property taxes, housing, particularly for their kids. Baby boomers would say, hey, my kid's still living with me, or my 4 kids are still living with me, and I want them to move out, but there's nowhere for them to live. And the education, everyone wants to feel like their kids are getting a good education. Now, I think it's really important that we look at and talk about education, because money is not always the answer with everything. Like, definitely the teachers should be paid more. Sure, definitely, 100%. But I think that there's probably some I think the Republicans are right when they say, like, hey, there's probably too many administrators. We should minimize the number of administrators as much as possible to save some money and use that money to boost teacher pay. We're going to have to consolidate some school districts. The state of New Hampshire has too many school districts. I mean, just the fact that Newmarket, my town, is one school district with 2 schools, and we have our own superintendent that we have to pay, I think it's $170,000. It doesn't make any sense. And Mississippi recently did a really cool thing. Mississippi was in the bottom of the educational rankings for years, like I think 44 out of 50, like really, even maybe really low. I can't remember what the numbers, but really low at the bottom. And over the last handful of years, they have totally reversed that, and now they're about 11th in the rankings. And how did they do it? It's really interesting. They just focused on literacy, hardcore focus on literacy and reading, where they just pushed this one issue, and I'm sure there's probably more to it. It probably wasn't just that, but that was my main takeaway, was that they really focused on making sure that the kids could read. And at grade 3, they said, hey, if you are not reading at a proficient level at grade 3, you're going to have to repeat grade 3. And what ended up happening was that even parents were like, well, I don't want my kid to be held back in grade 3. In grades 1 and 2, I'm going to make sure they know how to read, and I'm going to work with them to make sure that they can read. And it ended up that after a little while, after a couple of years, they didn't have to hold that many kids back because everyone got on board with this. Our kids have got to be able to read. And this seems so stupidly obvious that if a kid isn't that literate, they're going to do poorly in school. But it seems to be that is one of the issues. And I just love I'm a Yankee. Okay, let me just point that out. I'm a Yankee. Big reason that I'm running is because I've got 850 signs in my attic that say vote Kiper, and I'm not going to throw those away. So because I'm a Yankee, what is a Yankee? It's someone who doesn't want to throw things away. You might call us hoarders, but I like to say Yankee. Someone who reuses things, someone who fixes things, someone who is willing to just do everything that they can to not spend money. It's thrifty. It's being thrifty, frankly, is a Yankee. And the state of New Hampshire, we have to be thrifty. I don't want to, as governor, to be raising taxes by billions and billions of dollars. Okay. I don't want to live in New Jersey or Connecticut with super high taxes that everyone complains about. I don't want to do that. And frankly, I think when the government gets too much money, they start doing stupid stuff. Okay. And that's just not the New Hampshire way. We're never going to live in that state. We need a little bit more money to just make a level playing field. And like I said, put community first so that we don't have homeless people. We don't have hungry kids. Everyone's getting a good education. You know, these basic aspects of civilization we've got to focus more on. And so when people say, you know, how are we going to pay for property taxes? I get this question a lot. If we're going to lower the amount of property taxes we're collecting, we got to collect more money somewhere, right? The Republicans just put in one of the Republicans put in a bill to raise the statewide education property tax and to have it actually paid to the state, as opposed to right now. This was one of the original ideas to solve the education problem, was to have the statewide education property tax. Everyone pays into it. Some towns that need money get money out of this fund. But the richer towns said, we don't want to pay that. Coincidentally, a lot of those richer towns were Democrat strongholds, but they didn't like the system, so they stopped. So basically, every town now collects statewide property tax and does not give it to the state. They just use it. And many towns actually use it to lower their taxes. So it's stupid. But anyway, so the Republicans are actually trying to come up with a solution. Now, I don't think that one's going to probably fly. And there's other people talking about an income tax or a sales tax. I don't think those are going to fly either. And I'm not running for governor demanding an income tax or sales tax because I don't think that's what we need. Why? Now, you're going to ask, why don't I support income tax or sales tax? Well, for number one, as we move forward, there's going to be more jobs that are held by robots, by AI, by artificial intelligence, by automation. We're going to be losing a lot of jobs. Okay, there's going to be a lot of people unemployed. Unemployed people do not have an income to pay taxes on, and neither do they have money to buy things and pay a sales tax. Okay, so we really need to tax wealth and not work. Let me say that again. We need to tax wealth and not work. And how do we tax wealth? Well, what is great about New Hampshire is that we have had some great wealth taxes that the Republicans have eliminated. One of them was the interest and dividends that under Chris Sununu, they got rid of it. And it was collecting $187 million a year is what we're losing. This is a massive chunk of the budget, $187 million. And who is paying it? Mainly very rich people, because it's people that are earning their income off interest and dividends. But you know what is coincidental about Chris Sununu and them getting rid of the interest and dividends? Chris Sununu's family is very wealthy. Okay, they would have been paying a lot of money in interest and dividends taxes, and now they're not. Coincidence? I don't think so. But this is what the Republicans do. They say, hey, we're gonna lower taxes, and then everyone on the Republican side goes, yeah, lower taxes. What they don't realize is when they're lowering your taxes, i.e. interest and dividends, that most of you weren't paying anyway, it just means your property taxes are going up. Okay, it just means your property taxes are going up. All right, so we could bring back interest and dividends. How much? First, I should clarify the amount of money that the state needs to come up with at a minimum is about $500 million. So we bring back interest and dividends. That's like $180 something million. Now, we used to have an estate tax. Okay, this was a tax that on estates, I think it was over $1 million. We need to bring back some form of estate tax because I think it's a playing field leveler, right? Now, you're not taxing 100% of what someone's inheriting. You're taxing a portion of $1 million or more estate. And why is this important? Because inherently, if someone builds up a bunch of wealth and then can pass it down That just is building income inequality into the system. Now, we're not taking all of the money someone's inheriting. We're not. We're taking a small portion and using it to fund education to even the playing field. Because this is what's so important about democracy. We need an even playing field. Everyone needs to start off at an equal point for capitalism and democracy to function. And that's not happening right now. And so education needs to be funded so that all the kids graduate with the same opportunities for college and for the future. Really important to understand that this is a fact that kids who are less educated obviously don't go to college at the same rates. They get into more likely to get involved in crime, more likely to have early teen pregnancies when they're not in school. And the outcomes of these people's lives end up hurting society and we end up paying more. So if someone does poorly in school, they end up being a criminal. So we're paying for them to be in prison. It doesn't make sense. We could spend less money on prisons if we spent more money on schools, okay? This is actually fiscally responsible, and I need the Republicans and the Democrats to start thinking about it this way. Investing in schools is fiscally responsible. It is the conservative way to not spend more money down the line. More money on schools, less money on prisons, okay? The number one way to lower crime rates is to reduce inequality. This is a fact. You can look it up. So how do we reduce inequality? By boosting education. This is also a fact. And the reality is the corporations need educated people. They need people going to UNH, University of New Hampshire, going to Plymouth State. And yet the Republicans are simultaneously pretending to be the friend of the corporation, yet don't want to invest in the very thing that the corporation needs, which is an educated population. Okay? And this is where, to my Republican friends out there, understand your party has abandoned their values. They are not conservative and they don't care about business in a way that is actually tangible and will help businesses. I mean, businesses are leaving because there's not enough young people here to work for them. There's a guy, an inventor in Manchester, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Dean Kamen, and that's his name. And he's doing this bio research. He's doing all sorts of research. He's an inventor, biomedical research right now. But he's having to bring people into the state because there are not enough people that are educated in the fields that he's working in. And this is just an aside. A lot of them get here, they get to Manchester, and they're like, oh, geez, like, where's the nightlife? Where's the fun stuff? And Dean Kamen's actually trying to build up more nightlife in Manchester so that when he attracts these, kids in their 20s to come work for his company, that they actually want to stay, because some of them have just gotten bored and left. So, this is why we can't let New Hampshire become a retirement community. We can't let New Hampshire become just a suburb of Boston, which is right now, I think the Republicans, that's their agenda. It's not intentional. Maybe it is, but that's what the Republicans are creating in our state because of their focus on LGBTQ issues. Frankly, the Republicans are obsessed with trans people. They're obsessed with trans people in sports. It seems to be the only thing that they want to talk about. And why is that? Why is that? It's because they will do anything but talk about the real issues of property taxes, housing, and education funding. Do you get how this works? So this is really the goal of my campaign, is to have this conversation about who pays taxes in New Hampshire, how we raise revenue, and how we can raise more revenue to fund our schools properly. And I want to say, like, New Hampshire is actually, we spend a lot per pupil. Like, we're in the top 5, I think, or maybe at least top 10 for per pupil spending. But most of that money is coming from your local town or city. It's not coming from the state. The state is only contributing 20% of the education bill of the public education system. And that is fundamentally wrong, and it's regressive. The poorest pay the most, the richest pay the least. So just to recap, okay? Community first, economics. I'm focused on housing, property taxes, fair funding of education. And again, there's so many issues out there, and people will be like, sometimes someone will say, you didn't mention the environment. You didn't mention abortion. You didn't mention LGBTQ issues. You didn't mention democracy. You didn't mention fighting for, clean, whatever it is, whatever someone's issues. Democrats got to focus on, one, 3 issues. You focus on more than those. And this is in the campaign. This is what you got to understand. The campaigning is different than the governing. When we're governing, we can focus on many things. There's a lot of legislators. We can write a lot of bills. We can get a lot done. But when you try to campaign on everything, you end up campaigning on nothing, okay? And we can't do anything for women's reproductive freedom. We can't do anything to protect our LGBTQ friends and allies unless we have power, okay? And this is my message to the Democrats, okay? We have to get, like the Republicans, in a mindset of craven lust for power. And I know that kind of sounds bad, but we must get in this mindset of, I will do everything I can to win this election. I will do everything I can to win this election. I'm going to win this election. Once we have that mindset and we focus on issues that are not self-serving, okay? A lot of the issues that Democrats talk about are their issues, okay? You've already got everyone that's concerned about abortion rights is already voting as a Democrat, okay? There's no one on the sideline going, if Democrats talked more about abortion, maybe I would vote Democrat. They're not there. They're already on your team, okay? I'm a Democrat. I firmly believe in a woman's right to choose her own medical care. Understand that. I firmly believe in the LGBTQ's right to do the same and to be left alone from government intervention. So just because I'm not campaigning on something does not mean I don't care about something. If I was left to campaign about the most important thing to me, it would be the environment, okay? It would be the environment because global warming, microplastics, PFAS, those are going to harm my child and my grandchild and all the way down. That's actually my biggest concern is environmental things. And I think that should be all of our concerns. But I'm not going to campaign on environmental issues because it's just not salient enough in the brain of the independent voter. And not only independent, but Republican leaning. Okay, let me get this just so that everyone understands. New Hampshire has a gerrymandered political map, which means that the Republicans have drawn up the districts in a way that they have an advantage. So we have to be a little bit more conservative in how we campaign. Again, the difference between campaigning and governing, completely different. We can govern in a different way than we campaign on. We're going to govern and cover a lot of issues. We're going to deal with issues that we're not campaigning on. We campaign on the issues that the independent voters who aren't really checked in, who aren't really paying attention, are going to care about. And that's economic issues. This is the only thing that those people care about is economic issues, generally. There are a couple others. There's people out there that only vote on abortion, right? And they don't believe in abortion, and they're never going to vote for someone that does. And we're never going to win those people over. We're never going to win them over. And so, but it helps to not be only talking about abortion, be talking about housing, these economic issues. And frankly, I think one of the reasons that the Democrats have embraced some of these issues, and I'm going to say LGBTQ, gun rights, and abortion, those 3, you know why they embrace those? Because they don't cost the donors any money, okay? Let me say that again. It will not cost the donors economically if we focus on those issues, because the real issue is and will always be the struggle between the poor and the rich. And every other issue that people bring up is a distraction. When the Republicans bring up trans kids in sports, it's a distraction so that we don't talk about the poor getting screwed and the rich getting richer and the Republicans facilitating that transfer of wealth. Okay, when the Republicans bring up abortion and start bringing up this whole the left is killing babies, it's just to not talk about the class warfare that we need to focus on. So it's just really important that people understand the difference between campaigning and governing, and that you just cannot campaign on everything. And you need to pick economic issues because the independent voters vote on economic issues primarily. And that's why Trump won. He won because people were concerned about their economics, and the Republicans put up made a better pitch. That was it. All Kamala Harris had to say was, the economy isn't good right now. Joe Biden didn't do everything he could. I'm going to do more. Now, I will tell you right now, Joe Biden did a lot for the economy. And you could even say he did everything he could. But this is the difference between governing and campaigning. When you're campaigning, you have to be optimistic and you have to give people something to believe in, something to fight for. Okay? Even if, the reality is different. For instance, the economy is doing better than it would have been had we not taken the steps that Joe Biden took. But if the average person is saying, my reality is that the economy is bad. Perception is reality. Perception is reality. Perception is reality. You've got to understand that. It's so important. So I think that's all the time we have for today, but I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you for my co-host, The Plant, and we'll see you next week.